Welcome to Shenanigans Ensue with
Mary SanGiovanni!
Hi folks, welcome to Cosmic Shenanigans. I'm Mary SanGiovanni, and as always, I'm up to shenanigans of cosmic proportions. Today, we'll be discussing the movie Black Mountainside. This movie was written and directed by Nick, and I apologize if I butcher his last name. It's Sostakiwski, I believe. Sostakiwskyj, if you want to look it up. Now, there's some question as to the release date, because it seems to show release dates from anywhere between 2013 to 2017, but the common consensus on the internet is that the release date, the official release date, was 2014. It stars Shane Twearden, Michael Dixon, Carl Toffelt, Mark Anthony Williams, Andrew Moxham, Timothy Lyle, Steve Bradley, and Nathaniel Gordon. Now, this is definitely a cosmic horror movie by a number of different elements that we're going to talk about. It's a little bit reminiscent of The Thing. When I first started watching it, I've seen it twice now. When I first started watching it, it reminded me a little bit of The Thing in terms of the basic construct being a limited group of men in an extremely cold, isolated research outpost. They're in outpost NTC 291 in the northern Canadian taiga, which is, from what they say in the movie, the highest point in Canada where there actually are any people left. The closest reserve settlement of the indigenous people, who are often hired to help them in their research endeavors, is about 50 miles away. They said it would be a day and a half on foot if you were walking there. Now, this is an archaeological research outpost, which I think is kind of cool. They essentially are sent to these different locations where scientists either theorize or have discovered that there may be artifacts of an archaeological significance, and these guys go and dig them up. Now, the story starts with ancient, undecipherable writing. We've got artifacts. So right away, we've got this sort of Lovecraftian idea that they have found something that gives a sense of ancientness or timelessness, that they have found religious artifacts and the top of a temple. They believe the temple is about 11,000 years old. So again, you have that sense of something incredibly ancient, incredibly old, and something that has been buried away from mankind for a long time, and buried up here in the cold, where a lot of the scientists theorize that people didn't really stay here. It was, even during the Ice Age, even if they found a way through the cold, for some reason they didn't stay after the cold left. We've got a couple of cosmic horror standards, I guess, in just this. We've got a writing that they said looks Mesoamerican, but they are miles, I believe he says thousands of miles away from any place where Mesoamerican writing would have been. They said it's reminiscent of that, but it's not that language. It's a language they don't know, an alien language that they don't know. The artifacts that they're finding, bowls and great tablets of writing, things like that, seem to have religious significance, which suggests, in my opinion, the existence at one point of a cult dedicated to this religion. And we're going to come back to what the tenets of that religion are in a little bit. Now, what happens, essentially, is that, without giving away too many spoilers, in unearthing this temple, the men start to get very easily agitated. They have a sudden temper. They get depressed. They get incredibly paranoid. So again, that the paranoia is also, I think, a nod to The Thing, in that whatever outside influence is invading this little, very isolated, very insulated research outpost is something of alien origin, something that is changing them. We have bodies changing, and we have addressed this in past, especially in movies of cosmic horror. A lot of times people said Lovecraft was not the type to address any real, sexual or physical gore or anything like that, and it's not really true. I mean, reading into a lot of Lovecraftian horror stories, there is definitely an element of body horror there, an element of bodies physically changing against people's will. And that exists in this movie. They find an infection. The doctor, Dr. Richard Anders, finds an infection in at least two of the crew members, of cephalopod cells, okay, which somebody asks, so you're saying like a little octopus? And he says exactly, little tiny octopus-like cell, like the size of cells, that are attacking the blood cells, and that are actually changing them. So again, we have another nod to The Thing in that it is something that gets into your bloodstream and alters your own DNA, your own body cells. To me, the fact that they are little octopus-shaped or octopus-like cells, there's a very Cthulhu aspect to that. Essentially, this is where we have our tentacles, except they're teeny tiny tentacles. But these Cthulhuid cells begin by changing one of the men, and there is a scene where you can see these things moving and growing under his skin, and because the infection is spreading up his arm, they have to remove his arm. So there is a sense of body horror here. This is not an incredibly gory movie, but there are sudden scenes of extreme violence, which I find in cosmic horror is often done to establish the level of threat, that the level of physical and psychological harm. Now, on the psychological change side, we have, of course, insanity. Now, the insanity could be due to a number of things, as the doctor points out. Insanity is an absolute staple of most cosmic horror. There is a sense that that reality is shifting, reality is different. And you do get that. You do get that in this movie, primarily in the way that people react to the onset of insanity. There's a horror there, there's a fear there, but it's not stark terror. There's almost a quiet acceptance in a lot of ways, which to me is either that their perception of reality and what's okay and what isn't is skewed, or that they really just don't know the difference. That something in their world, something in their environment is causing them to go insane. Now, due to the nature of the job, and this is brought up in The Thing as well, isolation can cause that. It's one of the reasons why a lot of horror stories, a lot of cosmic horror stories in particular, are set in locations where isolation is an issue. Either they're stranded on an island somewhere, or they're locked away in one particular building and cut off from the rest of the world, or in the case of The Thing, and in the case of Black Mountainside, they're cut off by the extremes of nature, the cold, the distance. But insanity could be that. It could be a factor in, the fact that they've been isolated for several months, okay? But you get the impression throughout, from little things that happen, little subtleties, which is one of the reasons I like this movie, that it's not entirely that it could very well have to do with the infection that starts in the spine, as the doctor says, moves to bone, and then muscle and tissue, and then the skin, and then finally the brain. They can't prove that the infection is causing these people to act the way they are, but they think it's pretty likely. You also have, I think, a sense of the supernatural influence, because, for example, They start this movie on November 1st, and they do keep track of the dates. They are supposed to be there for one more month, and at the end of November, they're supposed to have relief planes come and take them away and, relieve them of their shift. They can't get a hold of anyone. And the radio man in that camp swears it's not his radio that's having problems, that it's the radio station, the radio tower that they contact for supplies and whatnot. But they find it increasingly more and more difficult to make any kind of contact with the outside world. Their help, the hired help, one night just up and leaves. They pack up in the middle of the night and just walk in 55 degrees below zero temperatures at night the day and a half it takes to get back to their reserve. A lot of their behavior is strange. There's a cat is killed, and not only can nobody quite pinpoint who did it, but there is a certain indifference to the death of this cat that is alarming, that would not have been the case earlier on in the movie. Okay? So we see psychological changes as well as physical changes. And again, that's a primary example of something that cosmic horror addresses, full on. We also have, and perhaps this is one of the most cosmic horror elements of this cosmic horror movie, is an entity that communicates through dreams. It is his voice. I say his because he is referred to as a god, and his voice is very masculine, very deep. But this entity communicates through dreams. They can hear him talking to them. It claims it can see through their eyes. A lot of the weird things that happen, a lot of these nighttime walks that several of the crew members take out into the wilderness, out into the cold, they attribute to dreams. So there is a disconnect, because we know as the audience that they're not sleeping, but to them they're dreaming, and these are complex dreams that they're having. So there is a disconnect in reality. There's a blurring of the line between dreams and waking, which is another element that frequently shows up in Lovecraft's work and is a fairly common element in a lot of modern cosmic horror. One of the characters claims that he dreams about people, quote, not like us, that watch him when he goes on these nighttime walks in his dreams. One of the interesting aspects of these artifacts that the different characters are studying is the animal figures on these bowls and other artifacts that they're finding. And we've talked in the past about how a lot of cosmic horror is either a nature as a metaphor for some cosmic force, or some cosmic force as a metaphor for the indifference and expansiveness and the raw power of natural forces, which don't care if we live or die. The world's going to keep turning with or without us. Animals here represent that, as opposed to trees or the reeds in the willows. Other stories we've talked about, other Makin stories, or even Lovecraftian stories where nature plays a part. Nature certainly plays a part here, but the implication is that this force, this entity, came even before the animals, even before the trees. That whatever animalistic qualities it has taken on those qualities so that it could be recognized and processed by simple human minds. That it's a face, one of many, that this entity can wear and has been wearing for thousands of years. But that's all it is. It's just a mask. The animals on these artifacts are, according to one of the characters, portrayed as godlike creatures. Okay? All these artifacts are about 30 feet, within 30 feet of the temple. One of the most prominent creatures on these artifacts is a kind of deer god, which the Professor Piers Olson, categorizes as a creator god. That, given the way that the figures are posed and how it all appears, that this deer god is seen as a kind of creator god from this cult, this group of people who worship this creature 11,000 years ago. Now, one of the final aspects of this movie that is most certainly a cosmic horror element is the little bit of this dear God, this creator God entity that we see. The things that it says are both revealing and even more confusing. And what I mean by that is that we've talked about how in modern cosmic horror, we've been lately getting a sense of how the creatures feel about things. In Lovecraft's work, what the creatures thought, what they felt, what their ultimate goals and plans are, was so far beyond us, so alien and foreign to anything that we could possibly comprehend, that we had no hope of ever understanding it. So it seemed arbitrary and indifferent. So that anything we tried, it would ultimately be hopeless, because we couldn't possibly begin to conceive of what the gods have planned. Now, in some modern cosmic horror, we get a little bit more sense. I think we've talked in past episodes about how in some modern cosmic horror, what we've been getting is more of the fallacy of these gods, their ability to fail, their ability to feel in ways that human beings feel, which make them less of an ultimate power, an ultimate deity, and more fallible, which makes them, which is a kind of terror in and of itself, because it makes them no stronger, no better really than we are when it comes to emotional flaws or emotional weaknesses. And we tend to want to think of at least benevolent gods as being all-seeing, all loving and able to take care of us. But there's something terrifying about the idea that any kind of creator could have been flawed, could have been susceptible to various weaknesses, because then what does that make us? If there is no perfection anywhere, then there's no perfection. There's not even a level of perfection we can hope to try to live up to. Now, with this God, one of the things I like very much about this entity, it certainly does believe it's a God. We do get some idea of how it thinks, but in finding out how it thinks, it just raises more questions, and I like that. I like that we can still know how it thinks and what its viewpoints are, and yet it is still something foreign to us, something alien to us, and almost incomprehensible. This God claims to have created all things. If you can hear knocking around in the background, by the way, we have cats and they're playing. Lovecraft always loved cats, so I don't think he would mind so much. But this creator God, he claims to have created all things. He claims to have been a force of both creation and destruction. And the professor says to me, well, you're no God. Gods are loving. Gods are kind. And this creature says, do you really believe that? Do you really think that's true? And he points out, and I think this is basically the crux of the nihilism aspect of cosmic horror in this movie. He said, sometimes things just happen. And there may or may not be a reason why. Sometimes good things happen, sometimes bad things happen, but things just happen. And I think that's sort of a fascinating cosmic horror element to this movie that really sort of explains a rather abrupt ending, but also explains just the deterioration of so many characters in this movie that maybe it's coincidence, maybe it's chain of events, but whatever the case is, things just happen. They just are. And just like this character, like they are what they are. So we have a sense of now, could this creature have been something where, you know, they're all hallucinating because they're all infected by whatever bacteria or virus they found in this temple? Did they unearth the temple of this creature and so wake it up so that it could reclaim the land that it had once 11,000 years ago? One of the other aspects that they note on these artifacts is a series of disfigured people without limbs. So there is a sense that when this thing ruled, the cold was never a problem. But once the cold went away and this temple was unearthed, that these people were infected too. Now that suggests to me that this entity, and possibly this temple, is far older than 11,000 years. That 11,000 years ago just happened to be the last time this thing woke up. One final aspect of the movie that I want to point out, because I thought this was kind of interesting, is that this deer god, who shows up very sparsely in the movie, but when he does, there's something very haunting about the way it looks. It is very vaguely, deer-like, but there's something very haunting about it. It keeps asking, can you see it? Can you see? Can you see it? In cosmic horror, I know we've talked about this a little bit within The Mouth of Madness, the idea of seeing beyond what we can normally see is a very powerful one. It's a very attractive concept that we could know more, see more, learn more. That in essence, it's almost like the Garden of Eden, that having eaten from this fruit, we can now see. We can now have the knowledge of gods. And of course that didn't work out so well for Adam and Eve. It never works out well for people in cosmic horror either, who go looking for knowledge that perhaps they shouldn't. But I think it's interesting that this is something that this god is encouraging. Can you see it? Now, they never say what it is exactly that these people are supposed to see. But there is a sense that I think what he's saying is, can you see beyond this world? Can you see what is really here? At one point, the god instructs one of the characters, don't look at the trees, don't look at the mountains, look beyond them. And I think that's what he's getting at, is that this idea that, and to me this is where the real cosmic horror is here, that there is something there. It is maybe, whether it's hallucinations or not, the concept is that these people believe that there is another world that is, either entwined with ours or overlapping ours or underneath ours, that is occupying the same space and that had been buried. And so we were safe. And now it is revealed and we are not. And that is a major aspect of cosmic horror. I think this movie, in some ways, I think the first time you see it, you may not get all of the nuances. I know I didn't. The first time I saw it, I thought, well, that's kind of an odd ending. The second time I saw it, though, I picked up an awful lot more about the real little cosmic horror subtleties, and I think it's very well done. Despite the number of similarities to The Thing, it is not the same kind of movie as The Thing. And I think that it does different things with cosmic horror interesting things with cosmic horror that, again, bridge a lot of the gap between Lovecraftian horror and modern cosmic horror. And I like to see that in movies. I like to see that in books and video games and other forms of cosmic horror media, that new and innovative ways of reworking the common elements that define the subgenre. So that's it for this week. If you enjoyed listening to Cosmic Shenanigans, you can listen to past episodes and future episodes on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Project Entertainment Network, all places where you can get podcasts for free. If you also like to listen to me, but want to listen to me being sillier, you can listen to another podcast that I co-host, which is The Horror Show with Brian Keene, also available through those same channels. And next week, I think we're probably going to be getting back to some more fiction. And I look forward to exploring the cosmos with you next week. Talk to you then. Bye.
Hello, is anybody out there? Anybody. This is Jim Cobb. If you are hearing this, the worst has happened. I've recorded a podcast at the end of the world and will broadcast it on channel PEN every Friday. It's all about the apocalypse, books, movies, TV, how much food and water will you need in your bunker, all that kind of stuff.
Excuse me, sir. You're gonna have to keep the noise down. You're in a library, and you're scaring the kids. The world hasn't ended yet.
Sorry, ma'am.
Shh. You're in the library at the end of the world with host Jim Cobb.
Fridays, exclusively on Project Entertainment Network.